part of the reason we've been able to do 10 albums, and not really be superstars or anything.
Bob Seger earned his reputation as the voice of the American heartland through decades of honest, straightforward rock and roll. Unlike many artists who constantly reinvent themselves to chase the latest trends, Seger stayed true to his roots. His raspy voice and emotional piano playing created a sound that resonated with millions of ordinary Americans. He sang about Friday nights, fading dreams, and the experiences of working-class people trying to make their way in the world. Before Seger became famous and his songs became the soundtrack to countless memories, he was just a young man growing up in Michigan. He spent countless hours listening to records, studying the music that would eventually shape his own career. He witnessed the early days of bands like Aerosmith, Bachman Turner Overdrive, and Kiss before they became household names. This exposure to raw, emerging talent taught him valuable lessons about authenticity and perseverance in the music industry. Seger never set out to invent something entirely new in rock and roll. Instead, he lived and breathed the music, drawing inspiration from real-life experiences. Every song he wrote came from somewhere genuine, whether it was the music playing in small-town diners or the sounds filling dive bars across America. For Seger, music wasn't about creating art for art's sake. It was about survival, about expressing truths that needed to be told. The albums that influenced him early on became the foundation upon which he built his entire career. These weren't just albums he enjoyed listening to in the background. They were blueprints that taught him how to connect with audiences on a deep emotional level. They showed him how to take 3 minutes of sound and transform it into something that could move people for a lifetime. Seger studied the masters carefully, learning their techniques and approaches, but he always made the music his own. He took what they taught him and filtered it through his own experiences as a Midwestern kid who understood the struggles and dreams of everyday people. Learning from Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry essentially created the language of rock and roll before most people even knew what the genre would become. His album from the late 50s wasn't just a collection of songs, but rather an instruction manual for every aspiring rock musician who came after him. Berry's famous guitar-driven tracks told stories that any kid with a guitar could relate to and understand. Berry's genius lay in his simplicity and authenticity. He didn't write about abstract concepts or use flowery language. Instead, he sang about cars, girls, and the universal desire to escape small-town life. These were real experiences set to music that made your heart race and your feet want to move. His guitar playing featured licks that were straightforward but absolutely perfect for what the songs required. The lyrics painted vivid pictures that anyone could visualize in their minds. What Berry taught Seger more than anything was how to tell stories through rock music. He demonstrated how to take ordinary, everyday moments and elevate them into something epic and meaningful. He showed that you could write about regular people and their experiences without making them seem insignificant or small. Many of Seger's most beloved songs, those anthems about night moves, life on the road, and pushing against the wind, trace their DNA directly back to Berry's influence. The core idea was that ordinary life deserved its own anthems and celebrations. Chuck Berry proved that rock and roll belonged to everyone, not just the privileged or the conventionally attractive. The young man working at the local gas station had stories worth telling through music. The waitress at the diner had dreams that deserved to be sung about. Seger carried this torch throughout his entire career, becoming Berry's natural successor without ever trying to simply copy him. He understood the lesson and made it his own. The energy of Little Richard. Little Richard brought an entirely different element to rock and roll. He didn't approach music quietly or cautiously. Instead, he screamed it into existence with raw power and electricity. His debut album was pure energy captured on vinyl. The opening moments of his most famous songs exploded with a howl that demanded attention. Everything about his music refused to slow down or compromise for anyone. This was music that physically demanded movement and engagement from listeners. It wasn't background noise you could ignore. For Seger, Little Richard represented completely unleashed energy and creativity. There were no filters, no second-guessing, just pure feeling translated directly into sound. Richard attacked the piano keys as if he was trying to break through barriers and reach something beyond. His voice hit notes that seemed impossible for a human to achieve, and he did it all with a knowing smile that showed him exactly how revolutionary he was. Richard embodied freedom in its purest form. He didn't care about other people's opinions or expectations. He wore what he wanted, moved however he felt, and created music that came straight from his soul without asking permission from anyone. Seger absorbed this lesson about authenticity, learning that being genuine beats everything else. The best performances come from letting go completely and holding nothing back. When Seger grabbed the microphone and let his voice crack with raw emotion during his own performances, Richard's spirit was present. When he played marathon 3-hour shows and left everything on stage, exhausted but fulfilled, that was Richard's lesson fully learned. The idea was simple but powerful. Give the audience everything you have. Hold nothing back. Make them remember they were truly alive for those hours they spent with you. Little Richard didn't just perform, he testified like a preacher, and Seger became that preacher of the same gospel of authentic rock and roll. Challenging the traditional ballads. For Seger, Ray Charles showed how music could cross cultural boundaries. Charles was masterful in jazz, blues, gospel, and even country music. He could take a familiar song and transform it into something entirely unique and personal. He played piano with a soulful touch, and his voice could range from gentle and whispering to explosive and pained. He was the original musical crossover, proving that good music is good music, no matter where it comes from. All the barriers between genres were simply dissolved when he got involved. Seger absorbed this idea of freedom and applied it to his own writing. He never felt constrained by what rock and roll was supposed to be. If a song needed a piece of country or blues or soul in its DNA, Seger would include it. He understood that emotion didn't belong to one type of music, it belonged to all of it. If he could make a listener feel something deeply, it didn't matter which musical tool he used to get there. The kind of acceptance that Childs brought allowed Seger to connect with audiences on an even wider level. If he sang about deep heartbreak or the joy of survival, he forged a connection that went beyond simply rock and roll. His audience became a diverse group united by the shared feelings in his songs, thanks in large part to the lessons Childs taught. Having Childs as an influence gave Seger permission to be himself completely and without limits. He also learned that music had the power to heal and unite people, even in the face of social change. Childs had a searing intellect, and his ability to combine soulful depth with immaculate technique set a standard for Seger to aspire to.
In the early 60s, Ray Charles did something that shocked the music industry. He took country music, which at that time was considered the whitest genre in America, and infused it with soul. This shouldn't have worked according to conventional wisdom. Country and rhythm and blues weren't supposed to mix, but Charles didn't care about supposed rules or boundaries. His bold experiment became a massive success, with his interpretations of country standards becoming hits. Seger heard this groundbreaking work and understood something crucial about music. Genres are just labels that people create. Good songs are good songs, regardless of where they originally came from or what category someone tries to put them in. Charles took country music and made it cry differently, adding new emotional depth. He took the Nashville sound and gave it a Detroit soul sensibility. What mattered was the emotion and authenticity, not the artificial category. This album gave Seger permission to blur lines throughout his career. He felt free to take rock and add country influences, to mix blues with pop sensibilities, to let gentle ballads sit next to hard-driving barn burners without feeling the need to apologize or explain. Some of Seger's most beloved songs have country music in their DNA. His romantic ballads could work equally well in Nashville or Motor City. Seger never worried about staying in his lane because Ray Charles had proven that lanes were imaginary constructs. Where Charles really taught was deep respect for the song itself. It didn't matter who originally wrote it or what style it started as. If the melody was strong and the emotion was genuine, you could make it your own. Seger covered other people's songs throughout his entire career, always finding something new and personal in someone else's words. That approach came directly from watching Ray Charles transform other people's music into his own truth. The Rolling Stones' swagger and vulnerability. The Rolling Stones in the early 70s were dangerous in the best possible way. Their album from that era opened with swagger and controversy, then broke hearts with gentle honesty. It featured extended jams that never got boring despite their length. This was a band operating at their absolute peak, hungry, confident, and willing to follow the music wherever it demanded they go. Seger loved the attitude the Stones brought to their work. They didn't beg audiences to like them or try to please everyone. They played what they felt, and if you came along for the ride, that was great. If you didn't connect with it, they'd be fine anyway. There was a toughness to their music that matched Seger's own blue-collar philosophy about rock and roll. The Stones sang about drugs, heartbreak, and living on the edge, but underneath all the swagger was real vulnerability and honesty. What struck Seger most powerfully was the band's ability to shift gears seamlessly. They could rock incredibly hard, then turn around and deliver something tender and emotional without losing any credibility with their audience. They could be country-influenced and honest in one song, then dreamy and floating in the next. The Stones proved you could be both tough and sensitive in the same breath, even in the same album. This album taught Seger about the importance of range and versatility. You didn't have to be just one thing as an artist. His own hard-driving rockers and nostalgic ballads could come from the same person and belong on the same album. The Stones showed complexity and contradiction made you more interested, not less. They demonstrated that audiences were smart enough and sophisticated enough to follow you wherever you needed to go emotionally and musically. Wilson Pickett's raw soul. Soul music doesn't get much more raw and powerful than Wilson Pickett in the mid-60s. His album truly lived up to its exciting title. The songs grooved with clear purpose and made you move whether you wanted to or not. Pickett's voice was a unique combination of sandpaper roughness and smooth honey, creating something both harsh and sweet simultaneously. Seger studied Pickett's vocal delivery like it was a textbook on how to sing with emotion. He paid close attention to how Pickett could growl and shout powerfully, then pull back to almost a whisper, demonstrating incredible control within what seemed like chaos. Pickett sang as if every single word physically hurt to get out, but he couldn't stop if he tried. That total commitment to emotional honesty became Seger's trademark as well. This was blue-collar soul music, working man's music through and through. Pickett wasn't smooth and polished like some of his Motown contemporaries. He was gritty, real, and sweating through every single note. Seger connected deeply to that immediacy and authenticity, the sense that the performance was happening right then in that moment, not carefully polished in a studio over weeks of production. It was live feeling captured on tape, raw and honest. What Pickett gave Seger was a fundamental understanding that your voice is your unique signature. Don't try to make it prettier or turn it into something it's not naturally. Let it crack when emotion demands it. Let it strain under the weight of feeling. Let it show all the miles you've traveled and experiences you've lived through. When Seger sang about life on the road or time slipping away, audiences believed him completely because his voice carried proof of those experiences. That authenticity came directly from listening to Wilson Pickett pour his entire life into 3-minute songs.
The Beatles' ambition and craft. By the mid-60s, the Beatles had evolved beyond being a simple pop group into something entirely different and groundbreaking. Their revolutionary album marked the moment when everything clicked together perfectly. The songs moved through different genres as if boundaries didn't exist at all. They used orchestral strings dramatically, created sounds that seemed to come from the future, and crafted melodies of impossible beauty. Seger wasn't trying to copy the Beatles' experimental approach directly, but this album showed him that ambition was allowed and even encouraged. You could push yourself beyond expected formulas and comfortable patterns. The Beatles wrote about loneliness, about the experience of aging, about seeing the world from new perspectives. They made introspection sound both urgent and universal at the same time, a difficult balance to achieve. What hit Seger hardest was witnessing the songwriting craft on display. Every line mattered and served a purpose. Every melody was carefully constructed with intention. The Beatles weren't just throwing words at catchy tunes and hoping something stuck. They were architects, carefully building something designed to last for generations. Individual songs featured horn sections that made you feel vibrantly alive or ached with quiet devastation. Each track was its own complete world with its own mood and message. This album taught Seger that commercial success and artistic integrity weren't natural enemies that had to be in conflict. The Beatles proved you could challenge your audience intellectually and emotionally while still having them sing along. Some of Seger's own work took risks with structure and storytelling, specifically because this album proved audiences were ready for complexity and depth. You didn't have to dumb anything down. You just had to make it feel true and honest. Sam Cooke's live mastery. The final and perhaps most important influence on Seger was a live album recorded in the early 60s but not released for more than 2 decades. This recording captured Sam Cooke in a way nobody had heard him before. It wasn't the smooth crooner from radio hits. This was the real Sam Cooke, sweating in a nightclub, working the crowd into an absolute frenzy. Songs stretched into epic call and response sessions. The performance became exactly what the song titles promised, with the crowd fully involved. This was church and Saturday night rolled into one explosive, unforgettable performance. Seger has called this the greatest live album ever made, and once you hear it, you understand why. Cooke controlled that room like a master preacher leading a congregation. He'd whisper intimately, then suddenly shout with power. He'd tease the audience, then deliver exactly what they needed. The crowd wasn't passively watching a show. They were participating in something spiritual and transformative. Every encouraging word from Cooke built the energy higher and higher until it felt like the entire venue might lift off the ground. What this album taught Seger was everything essential about live performance. It's not about hitting every note perfectly or executing a flawless technical performance. It's about connection, about making every single person in that room feel like you're singing directly and personally to them. Cooke's voice was undeniably incredible, but his real gift was presence and the ability to command attention. He made you believe completely in what he was doing. When Seger took the stage throughout his career, this album was his Bible and reference point. He studied how Cooke built a song from gentle beginnings to explosive climaxes. He learned how to let the band breathe and give the crowd space to participate actively. He understood that a concert is a conversation between performer and audience, not a lecture delivered from on high. This live recording proved that the best musical moments happen when you stop trying to control every detail and just let the music take over naturally. Sam Cooke showed Seger that soul and rock weren't different languages requiring translation. They were both fundamentally about the same thing, making people feel something real and genuine in a world that constantly tried to numb them. Both genres were about creating moments that people would carry with them long after the music stopped playing. That voice, that command and presence, that absolute mastery of the moment, that's what Seger chased and tried to capture throughout his entire career. The lasting legacy. Bob Seger never pretended to be something he wasn't. He remained that kid from Detroit who loved records and learned everything he could from the best musicians who came before him. These 7 influential albums didn't just shape his sound or influence his musical style. They shaped his very soul as an artist and a person. From Chuck Berry's gift for storytelling to Sam Cooke's overwhelming presence, every lesson stuck with him and informed his work. The Heartland rocker was built on these solid foundations laid by giants of rock, soul, and blues. Seger took what they taught him, filtered it through his own experiences and perspective, and created something uniquely his own. He became the voice for millions of working-class Americans who saw their own lives reflected in his honest, straightforward songs. His music spoke to Friday nights, fading dreams, lost love, and the bittersweet passage of time in ways that felt both personal and universal.